The Gold Saints are formidable warriors who have fought for peace and justice since mythological times. In ancient myths, we know of several legendary Gold Saints. Have you ever heard of a Gold Saint who came from a timeline where the world ended, just to make sure the past wouldn't make the same mistakes? Well, that's the story of one of the guys we're going to talk about in today's video. Hello, Saints and Amazons. Welcome to the Sempre Quis Saber channel. As you already know, I'm Wes, and today our video is top-notch. We're going to dive deep into the mythology of the Saint Seiya, the Lost Canvas saga, to talk about the 4 most unbelievable saints who ever wore a gold cloth in ancient times. We're talking about legends who have spanned centuries, survived impossible holy wars, and possess a cosmo that makes any specter tremble just by hearing their name. Get ready, because the power level here is on another level. Go ahead and comment where you're watching this video from and what you think about the cancellation of the Lost Canvas anime. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let's start this awesome video. Saint number 1, Itcha of Libra, the Judge of the Stars and the legendary Grandmaster. To start our list, we have to talk about the man who is possibly the most powerful gold saint that the Libra constellation has ever produced in the entire history of the Saint Seiya franchise. Itcha was not just a warrior. He was the Grand Master of the Sanctuary during the 16th century and one of the only survivors of the Holy War of the 13th century, along with his loyal friend, Crest of Aquarius, which made Itcha a monster in combat. It was his absolute authority over the 12 weapons of Libra. While most Libra saints only use the weapons in cases of extreme necessity, Itcha was able to control all of them simultaneously through telekinesis. He didn't even need to touch them to wipe out entire armies, being able to destroy even half of Hades' 108 specters using his Libra weapons in the 13th century. During his prime, he was able to restore peace to the world almost single-handedly, but that same peace ended up weighing on his shoulders. He survived the Holy War of the 13th century with Crest of Aquarius, and in the 16th century, when he was the Grand Master and already an old man, something happened. Itcha's story is marked by a deep melancholy. After witnessing so much war and the inherent evil of human beings, he ended up losing faith in humanity. This led him to be tempted by the fairies of the underworld. The twin gods convinced him that the only way to save the world was through forced order, under the rule of the underworld. Even as an old man and in a weakened state, his cosmo was so immense that he managed to subdue almost all the gold knights of his era, whose minds were controlled by the fairies. This story is told in the Gaiden manga of the Lost Canvas, where we see that Itcha was also the master of Seiya of Cancer, Gate Guard of Aries, and Hakurei of Altar, who was the only one among them not to be infected by the fairies. His main attack is the Final Judgment, a mass destruction technique that makes the galactic explosion look like child's play. This is Itcha's ultimate technique and is considered the deadliest of the techniques used by the Libra weapons. After becoming fully young again, he is able to send his opponent to the scales, which gives him the power to judge the merits of his opponent. And then he throws the weapons of the Libra armor like shooting stars, with great destructive power, capable of drastically altering the surrounding landscape. By throwing all the weapons in one direction, he managed to destroy half of Hades' army in the 13th century. Itcha was the living embodiment of justice, but a justice so heavy that it almost crushed the world he swore to protect, being defeated by Hakurei and his twin brother Seiya of Cancer, who became the new Grand Master after his fall. Knight number 2, Avenir of Aries, the Time Traveler and Hope. Now, do you remember the question I asked at the beginning of the video about a knight who traveled through time? That's right, Avenir of Aries is one of the most tragic and fascinating characters in all the works created by Shiori Teshirogi. He doesn't originally belong to the era of Delos Chikambas in the 18th century. In fact, Avenir came from an apocalyptic future where Hades won the Holy War, beheaded Athena, and exterminated humanity. With the help of the god Kronos, Avenir managed to travel through time and ended up in the 16th century, precisely at the time when the masters Seiya and Hakurei were still young knights and had just defeated the Grand Master Itcha. Imagine the burden this guy carried. He arrived in a past era with the desperate mission of preventing the tragedy he lived through from happening again. He became the best friend of Seiya of Cancer and Hakare of Altar, and his presence was fundamental for the sanctuary to prepare for future events. Avenir's power was immense, using classic techniques like the stellar extinction and the stellar revolution, but with an intensity refined by years of desperate battles for survival. He ended up sacrificing his own life to protect Athena's Sendai and ensure that the lineage of the Knights of Ares would continue. The armor of Ares, in fact, kept his memories, and that's why Zion is able to see the past through it. Avenir was not just a knight, he was the shield that ensured the future of the sanctuary would exist. Knight number 3. Ilias of Leo, the man who spoke with the earth. If you think Regulus of Leo is a prodigy, it's because you haven't stopped to consider who his father was. Ilias of Leo. He is often called the hero, and was considered the strongest knight of his generation, surpassing even his brother, Sisyphus of Sagittarius, along with Aspros of Gemini and Hasgard of Taurus, who were newly appointed gold knights in the 18th century. What set Ilias apart was not just brute strength or the speed of light, it was his spiritual connection with nature. Ilias was the first knight to naturally and consistently achieve what we call the eighth sense. He didn't need to make an effort to elevate his cosmo because he was one with the wind, with the forest, and with the earth. He could sense the movement of enemies from miles away just by feeling the vibration of the air. In combat, he was almost untouchable. Unfortunately, Ilias suffered from a terminal lung disease, tuberculosis, which limited his fighting time. But even in his most fragile state, he was able to face the judge of the underworld, Rhadamanthus of Weaver, as an equal. Ilias only died and was pierced in the chest by Rhadamanthus because he was trying to protect his son Regulus, and because his body was already at its limit because of the disease, being very thin and weakened. His technique was not based only on fast punches, but rather on a complete communion with the elements. Ilias lived in isolation in the mountains, acting as a guardian of life and teaching young Regulus that the true strength of a lion is not in its roar, but in knowing that it is part of something much greater. He died as a true martyr, protecting his son and the future of the sanctuary, leaving behind a legacy of wisdom that very few knights managed to achieve throughout the entire chronology of the series. Knight number 4, Quest of Aquarius, the master of the masters of ice. Finally, we arrive at Quest of Aquarius. If Itcha was the mind behind the sanctuary in the 13th century, Quest was the right hand and the longest-lived survivor on record. He lived for more than 500 years thanks to Athena's blood that ran in his veins, and a preservation technique similar to Doku's misophetaminos. Quest was the master of Dagal of Aquarius, meaning he trained the ice users of the 18th century. His mastery over absolute zero was so perfect that he could create ice that would never melt, even if it was struck by the fire of a god. He survived the Holy War of the 13th century alongside Itcha. At that time, he was only 13 years old, and in the 16th century, he was the gold saint responsible for protecting the goddess Athena's Sendai during the fairy rebellion of Itcha, being the only gold saint who was not corrupted by the power of the fairies, just like what happened with Hakare of Altar. However, in the 18th century, after training Dagal of Aquarius and also Cardia of Scorpio, Quest ended up betraying the sanctuary and becoming a servant to a woman he fell in love with. Quest restores his youthful form and assumes the name Koh-i-Noor, with his ice powers in the service of Miss Garnet, the leader of the Elwell's warriors. His journey is complex because, just like Itcha, Quest also began to question whether it was worth fighting so many holy wars that seemed to never end. He tested his pupil Dagal in an epic final battle, not out of malice, but to ensure that the new generation would have the determination needed to face what was coming. Then he was killed by his disciple Dagal of Aquarius. He represented the immortality of duty and the weight of wisdom accumulated through half a millennium of battles, thus being Athena's saint who lived the longest in the Lost Canvas. Guys, these 4 saints are proof that the universe of the Lost Canvas expanded the mythology of Saint Seiya in an incredible way. They're not just strong, they have stories of sacrifice, loss of faith, and redemption that make each one of them unique. But what about you? Which one of these 4 do you think is the most overpowered? Itcha with his 12 Libra weapons, or Avenir with his experience from a destroyed future? Comment down below because I want to know your opinion. And as always, thanks for watching this video until the end and see you next time. Burn your Cosmo to infinity.